Welcome to the Jaren Jarvis channel. I am Jaren Jarvis. Today, I would like to introduce to you 5 true scary stories from Reddit Volume 4. Story 1, The Goatman of Lake Elmore, by Mythology Loves Horror. Growing up among the rolling, green hills of Vermont meant that I spent a lot of time outdoors. Even though I lived in the capital city of Montpelier, my choice of activities had always been camping, hiking and swimming. Most of my outdoors memories are happy, but there was one experience I had that made me almost never go camping again. My cousin Corey and I were on summer vacation from high school, and we begged my mom to take us to our favorite campground for a few days. The next afternoon we arrived at Lake Elmore State Park, where a ranger gave us a map with available sites circled on it, and we quickly picked on and settled in. Our first night was uneventful. Since it was the middle of the week, the park was almost deserted, which meant that Corey and I never had to wait for paddle boats to become available, and we got prime lake beach spots without having to get there early in the morning. The trip was perfect, until the second night. My mom wanted to go home on the second day to check on my brother Nate, who hadn't wanted to come with us, so after dinner she left. We knew she wouldn't be back until around midnight, so we entertained ourselves by making s'mores and playing card games. After a while we got restless, and decided to walk down to the lake. From the bulk of the sites, the lake is about a 10-minute walk, and Mount Elmore, which rises above the lake, is always beautiful at sunset. We made it down to the lake shore just fine, and we enjoyed the cool sensation of wet sand squishing between our toes as we built a sand castle. The sun was beginning to set in earnest, and we hadn't brought a lantern down with us, so we headed back to the site to grab one. I was eager to head back to the lake, but Corey suggested that we walk the trail that goes to the old fire tower at the top of Mount Elmore instead. I agreed, and we made our way to the outskirts of the campground where the trail started. An hour or so went by as we walked and talked, just enjoying the refreshing night air. The lantern gave us enough light that we didn't feel nervous, and we made sure not to go off the trail. There was only one path for most of the trek, so it was easy to follow. At one point a herd of deer came bounding out of the woods near us, their appearance so sudden that I nearly dropped the lantern. Corey, now a bit spooked, asked if we could head back to camp. I wasn't really ready to, but I wanted him to be comfortable, so I agreed. We had been walking back towards the trailhead for about 5 minutes when we heard someone in the woods off to our right. It was clearly a person, since their rhythmic footsteps had a 1-2 pattern. It wasn't unusual for rangers to patrol the trails even at night, and if one of them had seen us, they were probably checking to make sure we weren't doing anything illegal or destructive. We waited for them to appear, but the steps had stopped and no one entered the circle of light we were in. After a minute, Corey asked who was there, his voice quivering slightly. I thought it was a little odd that we couldn't see a flashlight by then, but I shrugged it off and kept walking. If some weirdo wanted to be creeping around in the woods at 10 p.m. without a light, then that was their business, not mine. It was probably someone sneaking away from their family to smoke or drink, which could easily explain why they weren't coming forward or greeting us if they thought we would report them. As we walked, I noticed that, since the appearance of the deer, the woods had seemed oddly silent. I can admit that by then I was glad that we were heading back to camp. We were about halfway down the trail when a voice called out to us, which we instantly recognized as my mom's. The sound had come from behind us though, and Corey and I spun around in unison. I shouted out a confused, sounding greeting, but got no response. Corey looked at me, concern clear on his face. It made sense that it had been my mom in the woods, since she was probably trying to get us back for all of the pranks we had pulled over the years. Even so, it was a bit unnerving that she suddenly wasn't responding after just having called to us, and she wasn't known for dragging pranks out. We waited for several minutes, occasionally calling out to her. I started to get mad, because by then the situation wasn't funny anymore, and I was becoming worried. A few more minutes went by, and I was finally fed up. I grabbed Corey by the elbow and began to march back to camp, grumbling about annoying mothers and stupid pranks. Corey hadn't said a word, but I noticed him watching the woods around us carefully. As we reached the last 10-minute stretch of the trail, my mother's voice once again rang out behind us. It sounded wrong this time, and I immediately thought she might be hurt. I spun around, the swinging lantern casting distorted shadows. I couldn't see anything but trees, and I didn't hear anyone moving around. I was slowly becoming scared, and I just wanted to get back to the safety of the campfire. My attention was drawn to the lantern light reflecting off of something in a bush nearby. It was a pair of eyes, but to my confusion they were about 7 feet off the ground. No animal around here could be standing that tall, even on back legs. What the hell? Corey echoed my confusion. We were both staring at this towering shadow, neither of us daring to move. After a moment it stepped towards us, and our feeble hope that it was just a deer on its back legs was smashed. To this day we still don't know exactly what we saw, but the word goatman is the best way I have of describing it. A pair of woolly legs and a fuzzy abdomen gave way to smooth, humanoid chest and arms. The face was horrifying, a mix of goat and man that still haunts me. I watched as it opened its mouth, my mother's voice coming cheerily from it, but the sound was warped and too deep. "Hi baby girl. Good morning Lonnie." To this day I don't remember getting back to the campsite. I remember screaming, and running as fast as I could away from the creature, but that's it. I don't know if it followed us, or tried to communicate further, and I'm not sure that I want to know. We never did tell my mom or the park rangers about our encounter. We figured that they would tell us we were crazy, or chalk our experience up to the use of recreational substances, so it wasn't worth the hassle. Corey and I have both returned to Elmore since then, but neither of us has ever seen nor heard the creature. I've often wondered if we imagined the whole thing, or if it was some sort of weird dream. People don't usually share the exact same dream though, right? Story 2, You Had Better Be in Bed by 4 by Minuteman03. I just need to get this off my chest. I don't know what happened but I'll tell it anyway. For the summer, I was sent to live with my aunt and uncle. They lived a few states away from mine, and I wasn't too excited to go see them. My mom said that they needed help doing some stuff around the house, but I knew it was because they were lonely. Both of their children had left for college and were living elsewhere, so it wasn't uncommon to ask for company. I didn't always get along with my aunt and uncle, as I was 16 at the time. I think Christy and John were their names, but after this I lost all contact with them. I arrived at their medium-sized 2-story house, and I don't know what year it was built. I said goodbye to my mom and walked into their house through the garage. I was greeted by Christy and we caught up with family matters. John then felt the need to interrupt our conversation. "Rules, when you're under our house, you live by our rules," he said angrily, like usual. 1. No cell phones. "I will take it," he said, slipping his own into his pocket. 2. Don't talk back. 3. You had better be in bed by 4. He sneered and walked back out to the backyard. Christy said, "You had better go put your suitcase upstairs, and I should get to making supper." I walked up those creaky wood stairs and picked the room at the end of the hallway. I put my stuff down and closed the door and got on my phone. It must have been at least an hour before Christy called me down for dinner. I ate, watched some television, and it was already 10 o'clock. Christy and John were already in bed, so I went up to my room. I went to shower and clean up, then I went to bed. I closed the door and slipped under my covers. I got on my phone and noticed the cell reception was down, so I hit the Wi-Fi button. I was greeted with 2 networks, John's network and Johnson family. John's network had that stupid little lock icon and had a password with more than 10 characters. What a dick, I thought. The Johnson family network was unlocked, so I connected. It brought me to this browser that I had never heard of, but there was a local news story on the front page of the site. 7-year-old found drained of blood, read the title. I scrolled down and it talked about the body of a young boy found at the bottom of the stairwell. There were 2 small holes in his neck, where the blood had drained from him. His face was pale and a small glass of water was spilled near his outstretched hand. I was startled when I read the location of the crime. It was down the street from my aunt's house. I started to scroll around on social media before I got that battery 15% notification. I got up and went over to my suitcase and felt around for the charger. I got it and walked back over to the nightstand and plugged it in. I glanced at the alarm clock on the nightstand. It read 3:59 a.m. Dang, I thought, I must have been on there for a while. Ding, 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 I heard from the living room. It was that stupid grandfather clock. Then I remembered, that stupid warning John gave, you had better be in bed by 4. I slipped back into my bed and I heard a distant creak. That was from the one of the stairs, I thought. Then I heard 6 distinct footsteps. I slipped farther into the covers thinking it was a late night, sleep-deprived, hallucination. Then I was startled and about screamed, but I held back the urge. The distinct squeak of the bedroom door opening. I popped my head out of the covers thinking it was one of my aunt or uncle checking on me. I saw the bedroom door creaked slightly ajar and wrapped around the door, 2 massive claws, at least a foot long. I slipped back into my covers and don't know how but I saw the lights seeping through my covers and the loud awful noise from the alarm clock. I popped back out and the clock read 7 a.m. I was about to snooze it before I heard "Get up, sleepyhead." I got up and dressed and went downstairs. I smelled the familiar scent of bacon and eggs. I sat at the table and greeted both of my guardians. I got a plate and started to chow down. John gave me a dirty look and continued to read his newspaper. He then said, "Hurry up, because you're going digging." I nodded yes and went to brush my teeth. I realized I had left my phone on the nightstand. I went to retrieve it but it was gone. I saw John walking out of his room with a smile of hatred. I knew he had it but I didn't say a thing. As I was digging John looked at me and said, "I thought I told you to be in bed by 4. I lied. I'm keeping your phone for the month. You deliberately disobeyed me." Sorry. Our argument was interrupted by Christy. "Lunch is ready." I must have had no concept of time because it was already 1 o'clock. I sat down and John poured me some lemonade. I took a drink and spit it out. "What's wrong?" John said in a mocking tone. "It tastes weird," I said. "Sorry, it doesn't taste like you want it to taste." "Maybe you'd be better of drinking piss," John snapped back. I knew Christy wasn't going to say something. John was very threatening and kind of big, so she was nervous he was going to retaliate. I took another drink and started to feel nauseous. I got up, tried to make it to the bathroom before I collapsed on the couch in the living room. I awoke to the dinging of that grandfather clock in the living room. I think it was around 11 p.m. I got up and went to the fridge as I was hungry. I thought, was I just drugged, as I was shoveling leftover meatloaf into my mouth. I finished and put my dishes into the sink before I sat back down on the couch. I turned on some reruns of a show I watched at the time. I kept watching as it was on constantly on that channel. Then I heard the oh-so-familiar ding of that grandfather clock. Ding, 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 ding. As the last one faded out I started to curl up on the couch. Frantic footsteps could be heard running down the stairs and as I turned my head to look in the doorway leading from the living room to the stairs I saw it as the TV screen lit up. There standing was a silhouette of a man. 9 feet tall at least, and 2 giant claws. It outstretched its hand like it was using its claws to point. I panicked and jumped down between the coffee table and the couch. I must have hit my head on the table going down, because I just blacked out. I awoke to a woman in a blue uniform and a light being shone into my eyes. I saw blue flashing lights outside along with early morning sunlight. "He's up," she said. I got up and looked around, everything looked normal. The woman looked at me and said, "Be careful next time, okay?" I nodded yes and she walked off and out the door. John came up to me and looked me dead in the eyes. "When we do something, it's for your own good." "What was that thing I saw?" I asked nervously. John looked back at me with a mix of joy and terror on his face and simply muttered, "That is why you had be in bed by 4. I called my mom and came picked me up without question. We sat in there for 3 hours in silence. But to this day, I still don't know what that thing I saw was, but from now on I urge you, be in bed by 4. Story 3, London Fog by Malithos. My name is James Hemming and I'm an engineer working in the south of London. I have my own garage. Fairly popular, I'm pleased to say, or at least, this is how I would have introduced myself a month ago. Please, let me explain. I was just finishing up a busy day at the garage and had made myself a cup of tea and turned on the telly whilst I started locking up, putting my tools away, boring stuff like that. The news was on, particularly the weather forecast. I focused into the screen as the incredibly sexy weather girl began to speak. And as we move into next week, a fog will move in from the east and settle over London. Please beware of any hazards this may bring. A fog? That was quite rare, at least I thought it was, but I wasn't too worried as I almost never had to leave the garage during work days. The worst that would happen is a few less clients per day. With a feeling of content, I closed up properly and left for home. The fog had hit the city far more quickly than anyone could have anticipated. It was already brushing the city edges in the following morning and had consumed the city by the evening, bringing with it inexplicable blackouts and failure in mechanisms all across London. A few clients had garnered help from friends and family, pushing their cars the god-awful distance towards my garage. All of them had the same complaints. The batteries were dead and wouldn't recharge. Just to be sure, I had checked all the engines, the cleanliness of the fuel, everything, but the cars simply would not start. It wasn't just the cars, either. I already mentioned the inexplicable blackouts and mechanical failures. Well, they truly were inexplicable. Mobile phones wouldn't turn on. Fridges no longer kept food cool and the Nintendo 3DS I just charged the night before the fog felt like it had been dead for years. Everywhere, everything, was much, much quieter without electricity in our lives. It's funny, I always imagined a blackout of this scale would lead to people spending all their time outdoors, at best, and rioting, at worst, but the roads, the streets, the parks and the shops were all dead, only a handful of bored people wandering about now and then, and they always seemed in a hurry anyway. Even the streetlights were all completely dead. All but one. I had taken to wandering, of course, when all the non-electrical entertainment at home had become a bore and I had decided to spend some time at the park a few streets down from me. So I had locked up, wondering what good it would do in the long run, shoving my hands in my pockets and shuffling about so my coat covered me more. This damn fog made everything so cold, especially at midnight like this. At least, I think it was midnight at the time. From what I could see of the moon made it likely. It was when I got close to the park that I noticed it, a single light in the darkness. A single, solitary street light gleaming like a beacon in the abyss. I never realized how much I took it for granted as I began to make my way over when I noticed the thing lurking behind it. In this damn fog, you could easily mistake it for a human, albeit one that is trying to hide and peek out. It was wearing a trench coat and a top hat. It was hunched over, trying to hide as much of its body behind the streetlight as it could, to little effect. It was staring at me intently, unmoving, its bright eyes piercing the fog and meeting my gaze. I couldn't avert my gaze either. It was haunting. I almost felt as if it was beckoning me. It's safe in the light, I imagined it cooing. It's safe in the light. After what must have been a full minute of staring each other down, the creature gave a single, violent twitch, giving an audible cracking noise as if this was the first time it had moved in a long, long time, believable given how still it was prior. It twitched again, less extreme this time, as it slowly raised a limb towards me, 7 clawed digits opened to me, accompanied by a thumb on either side. I don't know why, but I felt fucking nauseous and I was about to turn tail and run as far away as I could, but I never had the chance. The creature instead quickly jerked itself upright, easily standing 7 feet tall, pausing for little more than a second before spinning around on the spot and running away, faster than anything I had ever seen. This made my nausea intensify and I had the urge to keel over, but I swallowed it back down when I felt the hot, wet breath on the back of my neck. And a vicious, hateful growl reverberating through my body. My knees were jelly and the blood pumping through me was hot, begging me to run, but all I could do was slowly turn around. I really wish I hadn't. I couldn't blame the creature for fleeing, because whatever it was hiding under that top hat and trench coat was nothing, compared to the fucked up monstrosity I saw, its hot breath now blasting and drenching my face. A cylindrical outstretched maw, with yellow teeth haphazardly swirling around inside, tiny holes at each tip and some pungent, blue discharge starting to leak out. Green and yellow eyes, looking more like tumors, seemed to be splattered on the side of its maw, not at all symmetrical in size, placement or number. A single antenna whipped around on top of its head, possibly searching for more prey after it was done with me. I could only stare, quivering in shock, as a deep blue, throbbing worm slithered out from inside of the maw, and it slapped against my face, leaving a sticky, wet trail with a sickening slurp. That wasn't a fucking worm, that was the monster's tongue. The monster clearly enjoyed the taste, as the tongue retracted and the growling began once again. It leant back slightly, preparing to lunge forward as its many teeth quivering, throwing that disgusting blue discharge everywhere. I prayed for the first time that night. As I stared into the jaws of death, I could do nothing else, glued to the spot that I was. I closed my eyes as I finished my desperate prayer. It was the crackling and explosion going off behind me that forced my eyes open, a great heat speeding and sizzling past my head and striking the monster in the maw, shattering several teeth and causing it to screech, not roar, fucking screech. Someone grabbed my arm and yanked me away, borderline sprinting as I struggled to keep up. It was all I could do to not trip and fall. Just when I could run no longer, the person holding me stops as well, pulling me into an alleyway. "What the fuck were you doing, standing there?" came my brother's familiar voice. I hadn't seen him since he joined the RAF 5 years ago, but the voice was unmistakable nonetheless. I'd have hugged him if I wasn't scared shitless still. "Why were you just standing there, James?" I could only stammer and whimper, barely getting across that I had never seen that thing before. My brother listened intently, an understanding look on his face, but his expression fades when I mention the creature beneath the lit streetlight. That streetlight wasn't lit, James. I've never seen any creature like that either, especially not wearing a top hat. "Are you sure you weren't imagining things before it came?" I denied it, of course, mentioning that the creature fled before I noticed the monster behind me. "Shit," I heard my brother mumble as he looked at the floor, "so there's more than one kind of monster." He looks into my eyes and thrusts something into my hand. Is this a fucking flintlock?" I half squeaked, still shaky. "Yeah. Despite not using electricity, normal guns don't work. Only this old-timey shit do. You know why?" He scoffs, "If I did I wouldn't be using a flintlock. But there is something I do know. This fog didn't come from the east, I mean, not in the way you'd think." My squadron and I were sent out to investigate. Should have sent some eggheads if you ask me, but orders are orders. We encountered the fog about 100 miles off the coast. We were pre-warned not to enter as electronics wouldn't work. Instead we simply fired some guidance-free missiles into it. He notices the look I give him. "Don't look at me like that, it was fucking orders." Anyway, this didn't work for obvious reasons and eventually we were told to return. We weren't told anything after this, except that we shouldn't carry any modern equipment. Again, we weren't told why. Fucking annoying, but you get what you're given I guess. Perhaps they didn't know either, I murmured. Either way. Go home. Stay home. This fog should clear eventually, so only go out if you absolutely fucking need to until everything's. He pauses better? He suddenly pushed me against the wall, clasping a hand over my mouth and looking out to the street. A monster, like the one I was rescued from, passes the alleyway. I could see more of it, its fat head kind of trailed off like a slug, its oily skin covered with boils and many spindly limbs extend from the mass, each one ending in 2 hairy claws. A disgusting whelp was heard every time it slapped its oily limbs down onto the ground, pulling itself along. Once the danger passes, he removes his hand from my mouth and sighing, relieved, "I'm guessing you know why not many people go out now. It's lucky I found you, to be honest. But You should go home. Quickly. What if I see that creature underneath the streetlight again? I don't know, James. Nobody else has seen it. If they have, they're probably dead. These words haunted me all the way home. I clasped that flintlock tightly, but still shaking. As I passed it, I noticed the streetlight, the same streetlight, flicker on, the meek creature in the top hat seeming to appear out of nowhere in the fog. I avoided its gaze and hurriedly kept walking, but could feel its eyes piercing my back. The god-awful feeling lingered until I finally made it inside and slammed the door, locking it. Fucking relief. I must have passed out right there and then, because I found myself right there on the floor when I woke. At first I thought I had barely slept, until I saw the red sky barely penetrating the fog, making the western fog seem more blood-soaked than lit up, realizing it was the evening of the following day. Out of curiosity, I peeked out my window, into the street. Many eyes were searching, darting around, illuminated by the many streetlights that were beginning to flicker on. One by one, the pairs of eyes landed on me and began to stare. The more pairs of eyes that landed on me, the quicker the others began to notice me, until the feeling of nausea was overwhelming and I flung the curtains closed, double-checking all the locks. I couldn't fucking take it. Whatever they were starting to make me feel sick. I grabbed a gas lighter and ran upstairs, furiously searching for my suitcases. I had to get out of there, and soon. The following morning I took the one suitcase I bothered to pack and just left. No sooner had I left the city, sometime in the late afternoon, and cleared the fog, mysteriously without incident of any kind, had my phone turned back on, as if it never even had electrical problems. Dozens of messages and missed calls. I made it to an area where I could relax, keeping the city in full view. I flipped open my phone and called my mum. Mum. Oh good God, I'm so happy to hear your voice right now. So began the long task of trying to explain what exactly happened. She didn't believe me, but she thankfully agreed to come and pick me up anyway. It was a long way from Cornwall to London, though, so I'd need to set up camp. I found a suitable location, made a bonfire and started eating the last good pack of sausage rolls I had left. That was a week ago. We still haven't heard from my brother, and I dread the thought that we may never hear from him again. I turn on the telly and flick out my phone, starting to write this up, trying to find anywhere that will accept it, anywhere fellow survivors, if any, can read it and share their experiences. A sorrowful-looking man comes onto telly, his brows furled and his voice solemn. The mysterious fog that has plagued London this past month has disappeared as quickly as it reached our borders and threatened to change our way of life. With all their equipment and operations functional once more, police and rescue teams have started pre-emptive searches to ensure the safety and health of any unlucky enough to have suffered this past month. In possibly related news, dried pools of blood have been found plastered on several streetlights all over the city. The origin of this blood is unknown, but the police have issued a statement, treating this as a mass homicide and linking it to the fog. Story 4, City Mural, by Because They Said So Too. I have a strange relationship with the city I live in. I moved here about 15 years ago and still don't really feel as though I'm a part of it. I honestly don't feel like I'm a part of anything. That probably means I'm the problem. I've got problems. Sometimes, usually late in the night, I feel a restlessness, perhaps it's anxiety, squeezing me. It flickers at the edges of my thoughts, a growing unease, a mounting despair. It's a terrible feeling, and when I get it, I have to do something, I have to escape it. So I walk around the city I live in, the city I am in, but not a part of. I walk the empty streets, accompanied by my distorted reflection pacing me in the darkened shop windows. Sometimes I see the occasional cars sliding through the night, like sharks with glass stomachs. Inside them, I can see the ghastly faces of their prey, lit by dashboard lights, peering out. Sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, I see other night walkers too. I don't know their names, but we recognize each other. Perhaps we are fleeing a common enemy, ourselves. There is a heavy-set woman with wild grey hair, an older man with a cane who walks with a limp, and a black man with a harshly lined face and missing teeth. We are figures all familiar to each other, but strangers to ourselves. All shambling to our own unknown destinations. We acknowledge each other with furtive sidelong glances, then our eyes, and we slide away, going in our own directions and into our own darkness. I am harmless, I think. But my shoulders are wide, my hair and beard are unkempt, and my eyes are black, and naturally squint. In the darkness, vibrating with the emotions that drove me out into the night, I seem to repel eye contact. Those I see, look away from me, walk faster, and even cross the street to get away. It perplexes me, but I am at the same time weirdly grateful. When I walk at night, I want to walk alone in an empty city. Other people I see, people seemingly as lost as I, are an imposition to my solitude. They remind me of myself, the person I'm trying to get away from. I don't want them there, or at least I don't think I do. The city I live in is a college town, and on the weekends, the downtown area is filled with people sitting outside of the bars, chatting, laughing, and drinking. To me, they all seem beautiful and interchangeable. They seem like the lifeblood of the city, and there is an open seating area, situated between a handful of restaurants and bars, that in my mind seems like the very heart of the city. The people there make it beautiful, and recently the city decided to beautify it further by commissioning a local artist to paint a mural on one of the walls facing the open seating area. The artist is a local one, a skinny tattooed girl with huge eyes and page boy bangs. I know her socially, we nod, smile, and wave in passing. I admire her industriousness, her work, and her mural. Late at night, when the square is empty, I walk past the mural. It's a cartoon collage of iconic things in the city. Buildings, a bridge, a local statue, and in one corner, 4 silhouettes sitting around a table. Obviously they are a representation of the open area that the mural faces. Originally, it was 4 outlined figures, but last week I saw that one of the figures was filled in. It was a painting of the wild-haired woman that I'd so often seen walking late at night. Her hair was combed, and she was captured in the act of laughing, her head tossed back and one hand raised as if to cover her partially open mouth. I had stood by the mural, admiring the artist's work. Perhaps she knew the woman that I had seen so often in passing. It was a fantastic portrait, much more detailed than the rest of the painting. I had tentatively touched the wall, the woman's cheek. Under the bright colors I could feel the pitted texture of the brick. The paint had felt dry, smooth, and oddly warm beneath my fingers, and then I felt something twitch beneath my palm. I had yanked my hand back, shaking it as though I'd been burned, and I stepped away from the painting, my palm still tingling. The woman in the painting laughed on silently, seemingly looking at me out of the corner of her partially closed eyes. 4 nights ago I was driven out into the night again by the feeling, and I once more walked the dark and now emptier streets. I did not see the wild-haired woman, nor did I see the old man with the cane and the limp. But I did see that another figure had been filled out in the mural. It was the old man in profile. He was sitting at the other side of the table, frozen in the act of pointing at the laughing woman. His cane wasn't in the painting. Perhaps he no longer needs it. Between the two of them sat the remaining empty shadows, 2 blank human shapes. The old man seems to be saying something. Beneath his large hooked nose his lips are caught in the act of shaping some unknown word. He actually looks as though he's blowing an open-mouth kiss at the laughing woman. Perhaps he is. I admired the mural and the additional detail of the familiar old man, but I admired it from a distance. I felt no desire to approach it. I did not want to touch it. Last night, alone in my home, I had again felt the feeling, the unease and desperation that calls me out into the night. The streets were dark and completely empty now, and although it was a hot night, or more accurately a hot early morning, I had felt my body break out into a cold sweat as my feet, seemingly of their own volition, had carried me towards the mural. I didn't want to go. I went. I had stood a safe distance back from the mural and I saw what I expected to see. 3 figures now, filled out in bright colors and amazing detail. The third figure, and latest addition, is the black man with the missing teeth and lined face. In the painting he's smiling widely and his smile is perfect. The familiar lines around his mouth and eyes form deep creases, but the formerly harsh natural lines have somehow been softened by the artist's skill into something nearly beautiful. In the painting he's holding up a drink loosely in one hand as though making a toast, and the other hand is held up, palm out, and fingers splayed, as if waving to the viewer, as if waving to me. Between him and the woman, sits the sole remaining dark and empty silhouette. The outline of the remaining figure seems to be in the shape of a man with messy hair, a beard, and wide shoulders. It is still just a dark empty shape, but it is surrounded by its colorfully painted friends. Friends frozen in the act of laughing, talking, waving, and waiting. In the dim lighting and to my tired eyes the dark figure seems like both a hole in the wall and a detached and separate shape floating in front of the mural. As I stared at it, it seemed to flicker and move. I had rubbed my eyes, backed away slowly, and I spun on my heel and went home. I told myself I didn't hear anything moving behind me. And as I walked home I told myself that the dark shape flickering in my peripheral vision was my shadow. But as I walked, it seemed that I felt the mural, or something else, lightly, insistently, plucking at my hair and clothes, pulling at me, calling me back. I told myself it was my imagination. I almost believed it. Tonight, when the city sleeps and the feeling comes, I will be ready. I will return, one more time, to the mural, its familiar faces, and the waiting table. I think that I will stay there. Story 5, I Want My MTV by Dopamine. When I was 20 years old and dumber than a box of rocks, I fell in love with Tim Fidget. I don't know why. He was bombastic, short, tempered, impulsive, and selfish. He wasn't even handsome, imagine if you will, the offspring of Lars Ulrich and a magic deer, and you'd have Tim. As if that wasn't bad enough, he was consumed, and I mean consumed, by the desire for rock stardom. He was sure he'd be the most famous vocalist on earth, despite the fact that he insisted on using Little Fidget as his stage name. Wrapped up in this neurosis was an obsession with MTV. Tim was sure that the sheer power of his forthcoming stardom would one day resurrect MTV from the ashes of its reality TV implosion and restore the outdated and irrelevant channel to its rightful glory. Don't ask me to explain crazy. I didn't get it, but I went along with it because I wanted him. We met in community college and quickly bonded over our love for Led Zeppelin and the Beastie Boys. We quickly decided we had to start a band, assuming we could ever find bandmates with half our talent. Fortunately that wasn't quite as difficult as we'd assumed. By the end of the week Tim recruited 3 of his co-workers, Shift Lead Toby on lead guitar, Cashier Moses on rhythm, and Stocker Jason on drums. I was the bassist and Tim was the vocalist. After 2 weeks of screaming arguments over whether we'd be a punk band, real punk, not that poser emo shit, or a rock band, we were in business. For a couple of years we played every venue that would have us, bars, farmers markets, school cafeterias, birthdays. We built a following, I guess, but not a particularly genuine one, just a mixture of friends, family, and that it, for, tat, scratch my back and I'll scratch yours mentality that in theory helps every artist but in reality only helps the top 10%. But it was fun. The very essence of joyfully misspent youth. We were all happy. Except, of course, for Tim. Where the rest of us dreamed big and ultimately played fun, Tim obsessed over a big break that never came. He demanded daily practice sessions. A weekend without a gig was a weekend wasted. The band came before everything, jobs, significant others, families, social lives. He lit candles to the saints some days, and consulted self-styled sorcerers on others. He downloaded occult texts from GeoCities websites and attempted to conjure jinn and demons in order to barter for fame. We went along with it because it was funny. After 3 years, he went on sabbatical to his half-brother's chateau. Said chateau was less than 45 minutes up the mountain, but it might as well have been Tibet. Tim cancelled his phone plan, sold his car, and told us if we ever tried to find him, he'd shoot us. I was pretty heartbroken, but at the same time I was relieved. No more 10-hour practice sessions, no more school cafeterias, no more comforting Tim as he raged over the band's failure. No more sitting on the sidelines, waiting for a self-absorbed artist to care about me. Things were good for a couple of years. Until Tim came back. He burst into the appliance store one golden afternoon in October, bright-eyed and apple-cheeked. Abby. He bounded over behind the counter and swept me into a bear hug before I could react. 1,000 emotions geysered up at once, rendering me dumbstruck. He pulled away and fixed me with a wide, starry grin. I did it. I did it. We're getting a record deal. Let's get the group together and celebrate. Naturally I thought my little fidget had finally lost his mind, but I went along with it. What can I say, I was in love. Tim quickly arranged a weekend at his brother's chateau. The bandmates quickly agreed, except for Toby. Can we maybe do this another time? He asked. My girl's got a. You have to come. Tim screamed. We fell into shocked silence. This is it. Don't you get it? I've been working for years, this is it, and you guys helped me. This is my career. I want to celebrate with you, all right? Tim fixed us with a rabid glare, eyes wild and scorching as stars. We good? We mumbled our assent. We didn't know how else to respond, we'd always done as Tim said. A week later, we were on our way to the chateau. As we trundled up the mountain, the tawny coppers and rich golds darkened to ember, red and deep sienna. Trees crowded the road, blanketing the car in a thick dapple of fire and shadow. I caught my first glimpse of the chateau as the sun slid behind the mountains. Chateau didn't do it justice, a 3-story behemoth of a house surrounded by a mildly insane wraparound deck. The deck bridged a wide ravine to a second, smaller house. The angular windows spanned roof to ground, reflecting the star-strewn, red and black of the evening sky. I parked and stepped out into the brisk evening. A coppery carpet of leaves crunched underfoot. The air was crisp and cool but not cold. There was something clean about it, clear and sharp as a spotless mirror. The chateau loomed overhead like a fortress. As we drew close, the mad tangle of decking threw weird shadows. It was like walking into a net. I shuddered, then followed Tim into the house. The home gave new meaning to the phrase open floor plan. It was breathtakingly huge, an uninterrupted expanse of polished floorboards. A small oven and furnace pressed against the opposite wall. Tim darted to the center of the floor. We'll set up here. Are we going to be bothering anybody? Moses asked. Tim shook his head dismissively. They're gone. Before I knew it, we were playing Tim's new song. It was like no time had passed. Like we just practiced together yesterday. Making music is a little slice of heaven, and this was no exception. When we finished the song, we immediately wanted to play more. But Tim stretched and said, "Wait a second, Abby, can I borrow your keys? I left something in the car." I handed them over. Tim went outside. Moses and Jason wandered off. I took the opportunity to use the toilet. Unlike the living area, it was small and cramped. Heavy air freshener couldn't quite mask the sourness, so I opened the small window. Crisp, cool air rushed in. I gulped it eagerly and leaned against the wall, peering dreamily at the landscape. Directly ahead were soft, rolling folds of mountains. To the west, a flood of trees crawled up a gentle slope. To the east, of course, was the small house with its bridge. A light burned in the top window, soft and golden. As I watched, it extinguished. And something moved on the bridge. It billowed, vast, diaphanous folds of shadow, dancing and roiling in the darkness. As I watched, it leapt into the air and held its position for far too long, spinning like a ballerina in slow motion. Then it descended, landing in another vast parachute of billowing shadow. I ran into the main room. Jason stood in the middle, visibly upset. Toby was laughing at him. Tim and Moses were nowhere to be seen. Toby spotted me, wry smile melting into an expression of concern. "Are you okay? There's something outside," I wheezed. As if to support me, A single clear, shimmering note, angelic and monstrous at once, rang through the night. "I told you," Jason shrilled. "I saw something." I glanced at the windows. My reflection stared back, clear and stark against the dark backdrop. We couldn't see out, but anyone outside could see in. "Shut the lights off." Toby complied, throwing the room into darkness. Immediately the night sky became visible, black and covered in stars, carrying a hint of deep midnight red. Yellow moonlight bathed the landscape, covered the bridge like a cloth. The voice returned, producing a note of such beauty that I momentarily forgot to breathe. "Shit," Toby breathed. That billowing creature pranced around the bridge, leaping and bounding silently. An inverse jellyfish, drifting through the autumn night. Behind me, Jason began to cry. Toby swallowed hard. "We need to go. Do you know where Tim and Moses?" A scream shattered the air, echoing from the upper level. Jason tried to bolt. Toby caught him. "Let me go," Jason wept. "You can't go out there." I dug out my cell phone, intending to call 911. I knew immediately that something was wrong. The clock read 99:24 and my screensaver had been replaced with a photo of dark mountains against a starry, red-tinged sky. In the corner of the screen I saw a familiar bridge and a billowing dark figure. I tried to call anyway. It rang 3 times in a broken warble. Then a low, droning voice began to recite. "The ants go marching one by one, hurrah, hurrah ah ah." The voice distorted and stretched, devolving into a single, broken note. I hung up and fought the urge to hurl the phone against the floor. "No reception," I whispered. Another scream rent the air, followed by an explosion of footsteps overhead. "Help!" Moses screamed. "Help me!" Toby took out his phone. I watched helplessly as he dialed and swiftly blanched. "No reception," he echoed. "We need to go." "We can't. Tim's got the keys." Moses screamed again, "Get me out of here." I bolted upstairs and found a forest. Abruptly and impossibly, the wooden stairs gave way to a carpet of wildflowers and tall, eerily swaying grass. I halted, stunned. The flowers started off innocuous, but the farther they spread from the door, the stranger they became, warping and spreading, sprouting thorns and eventually twisting up into thick, blossom-coated trees. Through that canopy, glimmering through breaks in the leaves, I saw stars, green and blue, yellow and red, pulsing in a dim gray sky that spread far beyond the reasonable boundary of the walls. "Help!" Moses screamed. "Somebody help me. I'm here!" I shouted. "Moses, come toward my voice. I'm stuck." He wept. "Help me. I'm stuck." Toby thundered upstairs and froze. He swore madly, streams of blasphemies issuing from his mouth. "Please!" Moses screamed. A flock of tiny, glimmering birds took flight about 50 yards ahead. "Help me!" I almost left right then. But Moses had a family. 3 kids and a sick wife. I couldn't leave him here. So I picked my way through the wildflowers. Something heavy and warm slithered over my feet as I passed into the thorny trees. I screamed, but it was gone as soon as it had come. I barely caught a glimpse of its sinuous, ember-colored body before it disappeared into the undergrowth. "Hurry!" Moses wept. "I'm stuck." I ran, avoiding floods of crystalline beetles and palm-sized dragonflies, and grimacing whenever a particularly cruel thorn tore my shirt. Despite my best effort, I wasn't getting far. I could still hear Toby swearing behind me. Finally I saw a break in the trees. Yellow moonlight shafted down, illuminating a limp body. I recognized Moses's curly blonde hair immediately. "Help me!" he screamed. "I'm here, Moses." I skidded to a halt and grabbed his shoulders. "You're not stuck." "What the?" "Help me!" he screamed. Only it didn't come from his body. It came from the other end of the clearing. The trees rattled. Something dark and misshapen thumped to the ground. "Help me!" I heard Toby again, uttering a litany of swear words as if praying. "Toby?" I whispered. The swearing grew abruptly louder. I realized it was coming from the same direction as Moses's pleading. The figure pulled itself across the clearing like a crippled ape. I caught a glimpse of its face, glimmering bony plates and a vast shield of interlocked teeth like an anglerfish, and ran. When I reached the stairwell, Toby was gone. No footprints, no clothes, no blood. Just gone. I hurtled down to the main floor. No Tim, no Jason. The front door hung open, framing a sliver of dark mountain and pulsing stars. A voice echoed through the room, low and broken and terribly deep. The ants go marching one by one, hurrah, hurrah. I bolted into the night. My car stood several yards away, bathed in golden moonlight. To my shock, the interior light was on. Tim sat inside, sipping a water bottle and skimming a battered paperback. I ran for it. But then a single vibrating note, ethereally clear, inhumanly high, impossibly beautiful, crashed around me, and that great billowing monstrosity streaked down from the sky like a comet. Darkness flew around it in tatters, carrying every shade of black, violet, grey and blue. A dark ocean, contained in those weightless folds. The billowing calmed, drifting gently around a tall, breathtakingly narrow body. Shadows resolved into clothing and a shimmering fall of black hair. The darkness split apart, and a face emerged. Monstrous and beautiful, inhuman and perfectly human, it regarded me. Blood stained its perfect mouth. Pale yellow eyes glittered like tiny moons. It smiled at me. The billowing shadows erupted and pulled apart. In the darkness, floating as if on water, was Jason's head. His eyes were gone, and so was the top of his skull. All that remained was a gleaming concave cup, half full of blood and damaged tissue. The creature dipped its fingers into Jason's head, then flicked them at me. Droplets of blood pattered my face. Then it raised Jason's head to its mouth, took a long sip, staring at me all the while. It approached, trapping me with those yellow moon eyes, and knelt. It was so tall that its head was still several inches above my own. Then it leaned in and kissed me. That kiss transcended pleasure, shattering the bounds of human ecstasy. Coppery blood and spongy curls of brain matter flooded my mouth and slid down my throat, carried by that all-consuming euphoria. The creature finally pulled away and sang again, not just a note, but a full song, heart-wrenching and heavenly and horrifying. It didn't sing at me, it didn't sing to me, it sang in me. Afterward it gave me another kiss, then turned around and tore the roof off my car. Tim screamed as it reached in and pulled him out, dangling him several feet off the ground. Wait, no. This is wrong. Hey. Hey. It dropped him. He hit the ground with a muffled thump and looked up. He froze when he saw me. Oh, shit. The willowy giant gave me a bright, blank look. Tim looked at me imploringly, pale and small in the moonlight. I'm sorry, Abby. You can go. It only needs 3, so you're good. You're safe. I'm glad it's you. You're my favorite, you know. You always were. To my astonishment, the giant spoke. It is done. Tim's face contorted, first in confusion, then in rage. What? Huh? No. It is done, it repeated in a voice that was low and high, animal and human, angelic and demonic. No. Tim shrieked. The giant exploded into 1,000 layers of multicolored darkness, and shot into the night sky. Tim immediately tried to stab me with my own car keys. I wrestled them away and drove off, missing roof and all. It's been 10 years. No one ever found Moses, although Jason's broken skull was eventually recovered 5 years later and 200 miles away. I haven't played in a band since. I haven't given up music, though. I was never much of a vocalist, but ever since that night, though, I can sing. I sing like an angel, like a demon, like a god. Ethereal and otherworldly, euphoric and heartbreaking. I can make myself feel and see whatever I want, whenever I want. So I sing to myself every day. And sometimes, when I hit a certain note, high and clear and achingly divine, I see my willowy giant, watching from the shadows with bright eyes and a perfect smile.